guys, welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this one, I'm going to be building the best $1,500 gaming PC that I believe you can assemble right now. I'll be walking you guys through all the parts that make it possible, how to put it together step by step, and looking at performance a little bit later to build an awesome PC that's great for 1440p gaming and beyond. Let's do this. The Gigabyte Aero 16 OLED combines performance, a sleek design, and a stunning 4K OLED panel to create the ultimate high-end on-the-go laptop solution. With DDR5 memory, a Gen 4 SSD, RTX 40 series graphics, and even an i9 in this model, the Aero 16 has you covered. A sleek design with slim bezels, top-tier portability, and awesome aesthetics rounds off a great package. Learn more about the Gigabyte Aero 16 OLED at the first link in the description below. This video will be split into three main sections. First, I'll be using PC Part Picker to pick all the components for this build. Then I'll order the components and show you guys how to assemble this system before looking at performance a little bit later. So let's get cracking and pick out those components first of all. The first part that I'm going to pick out is the processor. Now we've got a few options here. We can go AMD or Intel. The Ryzen 7000 lineup, something like the Ryzen 5 7600, or on the i5 side, the 13600K or 14600K. So let's see where we're at. The 7600X is coming in at about 239, though I think at Newegg in particular we can actually push this down even further to about 209 if we're prepared to deal with the current backorder situation. And then let's see where the 13600K and 14600K land. 13600KF is more at 249, while the 14600K is 303 for the 14600KF. Let's go ahead and pop the 7600 in for now though, as I think that's currently the best value option we have. As far as CPU cooling goes, I think personally, I'm thinking a 240mm all-in-one liquid cooler is going to be the best bet. We don't need anything larger for a Ryzen 5 or i5 tier CPU. Sort by price low to high, and let's take a look at some of the options. Core Liquid 240RV2 from MSI is pretty good. Also have used the ML240L from Cooler Master previously and been impressed with that as well. But I'm also noticing here the DeepCool LS520 and LS520 SE, both of which are going to be pretty good options. $83, that is amazingly good value. We've had really good experiences with this cooler before. $71 at Newegg, currently out of stock, but I imagine it'll drift back in and out over the coming weeks. Or $83 at B&H right now means it's an available option as well. I'm also going to pop in the memory at this stage. I know that we need a 32GB kit of DDR5, so let's see some of the options. We've got two 16GB DIMMs, obviously got to be DDR5, and I'd like to keep the cache latency below 36, as that's going to make sure we get nice low latency gaming performance. A kit that seems to come up time and time again is this Teamgroup T-Force Delta RGB. $89 here for the 36 kit, but we can get a CR32 kit for $89 as well. So I think that's going to be my RAM kit of choice. While I'm here as well, I'm also going to do storage. I want to go for a Gen 4 NVMe drive, so we want SSDs of the M.2 PCIe Gen 4 form factor, and I think we want, personally for this build, a 2TB option. And what's immediately interesting, if we look at the top of the list, the Samsung SSD 990 Pro, which is one of the new top-end Gen 4 drives, is just $120 for the 2TB capacity. We could look at some of the other options, but the 990 just makes total sense and is an amazing drive in our experience. At this point, we can also go ahead and find ourselves a motherboard. On the AMD side, you've got B650 or we've got X670. I want to see though what we can get on the B650 lineup. I've further filtered this down to also include boards with Wi-Fi, and looking at the options, we've got the ASRock B650M Pro, the MSI Pro, or this Gigabyte B650 Gaming X AX. From my experience though, this board just excels the most out of those three options when it comes to connectivity, and just has far more things we can plug into than those other boards coming up at this price point. Next up is the case. Now, the case is always going to be a personal decision based on exactly what you guys want your systems to look like. Couple of good options straight off the bat. 4000D airflow from Corsair, pretty solid. H5 flow from NZXT, pretty solid. I've also got to give a shout out to a case like the Montech Air 903 Max, which for like $70 if you're on the more budget end of things is a really amazing option. I quite like the look though of this Fractal design Pop Air RGB. I've heard loads of great things about this case, but never actually got hands-on with one. RGB fans, $90 is going to save us a good deal of cash, but come from a really high quality case manufacturer. So let's add that to the list. Now, we've got basically everything that we need apart from the graphics card. $850 so far. So we've got, quick maths, $642.06 left to spend. So let's go on the video video card section, find ourselves a GPU for under $652. We'll extend the budget out and see what we get. So on the Nvidia side, you have got the RTX 4070. It's a 599 MSRP card, so would be in budget. And if you want DLSS 3, you want ray tracing, it's an okay bet, but it's certainly not fantastic. On the AMD side of the equation, you've got the 7700 XT coming at $449, and on the higher end to that, you've got the 7800 XT, which comes in at about $499. But again, we've got $650 to spend. There's just nothing between the $500 and $650 price point. I'd love to see either Nvidia or AMD bring something to plug that gap. Now, in all honesty, when it comes to a 7800 XT, you can basically go for whichever one that you have available. We've got a few 7800 XTs in, so I'm going to pick one out from our arsenal. But in terms of recommendations, the Sapphire Pulse is a pretty good option, but it's only 2 fans. Instead, I think the extra $10 or $20 that you have left over is good for a triple fan card like this one from Sapphire, this one from XFX, this one from ASRock. So let's just add in one that's about $520 to allow us to go slightly over on a better cooler and see where we are. $1,377. Changes I would probably make. CPU could be swapped out for something else. I think maybe let's notch that up to a 7700X. Does that make sense? 319. I think that probably does make sense. And that sits us under budget at $1,457.93. All that's left to do now is order the bits that I'm missing and then go ahead and get this thing built. A few days later, everything that I needed to order in has arrived, and I have to say, and I'm obviously a little bit biased, I think I've picked quite well here. Obviously got the Ryzen 7 7700X processor, we got our brand new memory, the first time I've looked at this Delta DDR5 in person, which is quite exciting, and somewhere on the floor is the Fractal Pop Air, the first time I've ever built, in this case, from Fractal Design. So what are we waiting for? Let's go ahead and get this thing put together and start, as always, with the CPU, motherboard, RAM, and SSD. Oof. Heavy. I have to say, when it comes to price competitive builds, Gigabyte and their Aura sub-brand have been really quite surprisingly competitive in the last few videos that I've made. And this B650 board is genuinely no exception. Compared to some B650 designs, this board is also absolutely stacked. With a really decent I/O, you've got Wi-Fi 6, 2.5 gig Ethernet, 10 gig USB-C, built-in rear I/O shield, and then all of the heat sinks for the M.2s. It's just really quite nice. And of course, gives us plenty of upgradability now and into the future. One of the massive advantages of the fact that AMD have said they're sticking with the AM5 socket for, I think it was at least 3, but maybe even 4 CPU generations, means that once I can unbox this CPU, I can actually show you guys how this motherboard is good for years to come. The Ryzen 7 7700X is also a really, really great design when it comes to a bit of multi-threaded performance. Drop that in there, pop the socket cover back into place, jobs are good un. The memory or DRAM is next up, this nice low latency kit of T4's Delta RGB. Now, I remember using their DDR4 version of this kit and being quite impressed. It was always one of the best value options on the market, so I'm hoping that this kit is going to be no different. The only thing really to note with this kit is that it isn't quite as low profile as some of the other options out there. So if you're going for a beefier air cooler with a big heatsink on, you might want to be mindful that the clearance could be a bit of a challenge. Just going to slide the RAM in using the 2nd and 4th slots in this build. That's quite a nice snug fit, and design-wise, I think that looks pretty sleek, to be honest with you. SSD is next up, one of the most exciting parts in this build. Can't believe how much these drives have come down in price. The fact you can get a top-of-the-range 990 Pro for $100 or so and get, you know, the choice of 1 or 2 terabytes is amazing. Now, this board obviously comes with plenty of M.2 heatsinks. I feel like people waste so much money on drives with built-in heatsinks when all of the boards nowadays with Gen 4 and Gen 5 slots come with them as standards. So just unscrew that, take off the actual heatsink itself, drop the drive into place. There we go. And then you can either screw it in, or what I would do, to be honest, is just pop the heat shield back on, fasten that down, and that will actually hold the drive into place and stop it from going anywhere. Once the drive's in, then we're pretty much done with the motherboard. I am going to have a look at the CPU cooler at this stage though, as often there's mounting hardware that's beneficial to install now, rather than later once we've popped this into the case. And that is of course where DeepCool's LS520 comes in. Now for AMD CPUs, what do we actually need to do? Let me consult the manual. So, looks pretty simple actually. We need to find some of the included bags of screws, which look a little something like this. And the particular screws that we're after are the ones with the black plastic spacers built in. So it's these with a black plastic ring on one side and then a bare thread on the other. And what we're going to do with these is actually pop them in to the included threads that already poke through the motherboard around the CPU. That's another one of the advantages of an AMD platform. You get an included backplate that's pre-installed, it's a lot less faff and a lot less hassle, and this is actually all the cooler prep we need to do now before moving the motherboard into the case. Talking of which, here it is, the very fragile, apparently, Fractal Design Pop Air. Now, first impressions are actually pretty good. It feels not too big for an ATX chassis. It's got a smaller tempered glass side panel, which I quite like. And if I remove that, you'll be able to see inside at the full-size ATX motherboard tray. Rear panel's got captive thumb screws and feels very, very rigid. At the back is a single 120mm. I think that's an RGB fan. Yes, it is. 2 RGB fans at the front. And of course, the reason this case is so popular, all of this mesh, which maybe pops off, I want to say. Yes. Oh, what's happened? There's a magnetic front piece, and then behind that, what are you? Drawer for hiding things. That's actually pretty clever. It does, of course, inhibit the ability to install 360mm rads at the front. By inhibits, I mean you can't. So we're limited, I believe, to a 280 at the front and then a 240 at the top. But it's cheap and it does exactly what we need for this build. Now, inside the case, you'll find yourself a bag. They should have put this bag in the drawer, really. That would have been a bit more clever. A bag of all the screws, cable ties, stoppers, everything you need to actually build the PC. Once you've done that, just a case of putting the motherboard inside the case. Now, built-in rear I/O shield makes our life a bit easier here, so we can slide it in. All the screws are going to be in the right place. There we are. Lovely stuff. The raised centre standoff is going to keep it in place while we screw it in. 3 at the top, 3 down the middle, and then 2 screws across the bottom to get it nice and secure. You can see there isn't a load of clearance. This isn't a great enthusiast case, but for a build like this, it's going to work perfectly fine. I think I might do the radiator next, but I want to do a test fit. Now, feasibly, it would fit really easily at the front of the case, up here, but I'd like to put it at the top for aesthetic reasons. I think it will just look a bit cleaner. Let's see, though, if it's plausible. So we've got no fans on at the moment. Push that up flush. Could be a little bit tight. I think we need to add a fan in just to actually check. Will it fit? Oh, I think that it will, but only just. So I think we're going to go for a top-mounted install. Another reason for that is that it gives us some exhaust fan ventilation. It means we can use the fans at the front as our intake, the fan at the back for our exhaust, and also add additional exhaust at the top of the case to keep that air flowing pretty nicely. Going to add the fans onto the underside of the radiator first, then screw the rad into the top of the case and finish things off with the water block. But don't forget, a bit of thermal paste is really important to create that nice bond between the CPU and the cooler. Then all that's really left to do is add in power and, of course, the GPU. Now, I've been a big fan of this PowerColor 7800 XT model since we first reviewed it back when the card launched a few months ago. The only problem is, it is a little bit more on the pricey side by 7800 XT standards. Very well presented, provides great performance, but there are definitely cheaper models out there that you may want to consider. We've looked at the Gigabyte Gaming OC model loads. That's a great example. So is this Sapphire Pulse card that we've also had hands-on with in the studio. If you've got the budget left over, though, which we did in this build, something like this is amazing. The build quality feels phenomenal. The design is great. You've got this nice RGB light bar that's red by default, but it isn't, of course, the only reason that this makes for a great graphics card. Performance-wise, it also stacks up really, really well. Take the new Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 as an example. At 1440p high settings, with FSR enabled and set to quality, this card is capable of over 200 FPS, with a 208 frame per second average in our testing. Starfield at 1440p high is another great set of results. 87 FPS leads to a buttery smooth gameplay experience, and while it would be nice if it was a little bit higher, you'll struggle to do so in a game like Starfield where the optimizations just aren't quite as good. Hogwarts Legacy at 1440p high is another good set of results. 118 FPS. Whether it's a latest AAA title or something that's a little bit older, this card really can perform. Heck, even at 1080p competitive settings in a game like Fortnite, and you're sure to be impressed. Just shy of 300 frames per second on average from this card makes for a highly competitive gaming experience. And to round things off, why not look at Apex Legends 2? 1440p high and the 7800 XT brings in a storming 204 FPS on average. It really is a great card from AMD, and perhaps what's even better about it is just how price competitive it stayed in and around that MSRP. So let's go ahead and install it, shall we? Gonna push push back the PCI notch on the motherboard itself, and then of course remove the second and third PCI lane. If you'd like to learn more about which card is the best 7800 XT to buy, check out our web article in the card section up here for a bit more information on why we've picked certain models as our favourites. Remove the PCI lane covers. Some people will say, keep these safe. I was going to chuck them, but I've already done that with the screw before actually it's got a little wrong. Before sliding the graphics card in. Yep, looking good. Bit of pressure and returning the thumb screws back into place. That's of course going to prevent the GPU from sagging, stop it going anywhere, and the whole thing just looks blooming lovely. Power supply is next, and actually the final component to pop in, and this is Thermaltake Smart BM3 750. The power supply market's in a bit of a mess right now, and finding an 80X3 PCI Gen 5 compatible PSU without the need for adapters or horrible extensions is near impossible. This though is a breath of fresh air, available in 750 watts, 850 watts. It's semi-modular. Now that means you only plug in the cables you actually need. We don't need the Gen 5 cable for this build, as of course we'll be using two 8-pins instead, but it's always nice to have. For this build though, need to plug in a few cables. SATA power is of course one of them, so let's pop that in. Also need to get a dual 6+2 pin PCIe power harness, so let's also add that into place. Lovely stuff. Then the power supply is ready to go. And then slide the power supply into place. You'll notice that I've gone for a fan down orientation to pull in fresh air from underneath the chassis, and included dust filter here prevents dust from getting in and clogging at the power supply. So remember to clean that every now and again. And then I can plug up all the cables, starting with the motherboard cable at the far right hand side, CPU power in the top left, and GPU of course to the graphics card itself. And with that, the system's ready to be powered up so we can check out just how good it looks. I'll leave you on an awesome GeekaWhat montage. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.